cloud. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to share the screen here. Okay, cool. All right, so before we start, a couple things to get set up. First, I am using my own suite of brushes. And when I say my own suite of brushes, I mean they're just I'm pressing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on my keyboard and just switching those brushes. So the first brush is standard, second is move. I like move topological. Third is clay, fourth is clay buildup, 5 is demon standard, 6 is hard polish, 7 is trim dynamic, 8 is inflate. So really just for this one though, we really just need this the move brush, and then we'll need to do things like use the 3D gizmo, which is you can access just by pressing W, E, or R, which is like the Maya shortcuts. And if you have a normal layout, it'll say like W, E, R, or move, translate, scale up there, and I'll just switches to it for you. And we'll go over those step by step. Well, excuse me. Okay. So the first idea here is that before I get started on this, what I need to do is, and I'm also using my custom layout, which I think I sent all those files to you guys, so be sure to check those out. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to my concept, and I'm going to prepare my concept for this exercise. So the main idea we're going for is that we want to essentially break our character down to primitives, primitive basic shapes. And so we could do that just by like, the torso is a cylinder, and you probably should start like that. But in general, I like, you want to break it down a little bit further to represent some form of anatomy and volume. So, all your shapes shouldn't just be circles, right? Or spheres and cylinders, just simple spheres and cylinders. They should be like slightly more complex. So let me go ahead and show you guys. So I'm going to show you guys the block-in notes that I have from Dylan Ekron. So it's essentially the idea for kind of how to approach this. And I'm going to share with you guys like a reference folder later. And you can see his is like even simpler to some, not simpler, but in some ways his is like simpler, in some ways it's a little more complex. So in this guide, we're going to want to make sure that we're building our character and looking at their proportions and shapes at a very like basic level, right? Like we want to focus on like the silhouette and volume of the character, and we don't want to get lost in the details. So let's see, I'm also kind of reading his notes to make sure I don't say anything. And so you can use a pre-existing mesh, but I personally, for this kind of thing, especially for how stylized our characters are, we don't want to do that. So one of the exercises you want to do is separating your character out. So we want to focus on like large pieces that represent like kind of big blocks of anatomy. And the more like differentiated those pieces are, you can see that he breaks them out more or less. So in this case, like for this female character, her arm is simpler, right? Because there's not a lot of what's it called? Not a lot of dynamic anatomy hits, right? Like big, fat, like and sharp, like shape changes. So he can represent things with fewer pieces. But you can see in here where this character's musculature is really important. You can see he's separating them out more. So he says right here, like you can see as the rule to follow here is create the fewest number of parts you need to represent the silhouette and overall level of detail for your character. So really we're focusing on like how those shapes are going to break out of this. Like if you look at the character, like, and look at their edges from different views, like how is their silhouette being affected, and how much do you need to have different shapes, right? Let's see. So he has this example as like, you don't have to have things like like little tiny abs, but if it affects the silhouette, that's really important. But you can see like even like this head shape, he's breaking it down into two simpler shapes because his head's very stylized. And so here he's kind of talking it, he calls it like the snowman effect. But the more complex the part of that mesh, the easier it is to run into an issue where I see a lot that I call stacking. And so a lot of undefined parts that don't flow into each other. So that's an important part, is like your parts need to flow into each other, which is something I worked hard on mine, right? Like even though this piece and this piece and this piece are like 3 separate pieces, I tried to focus on them like flowing, connecting into each other just by having them overlap, right? And so again, like focusing on their silhouette, which I think you can do. There's a material called Zbrush. Oh, I have one called Zbrush Silhouette, but you could also do one that's called think it's outline thin. So you can kind of see it still has this weird outline thing. I'm also using a material called Zbrush paint. You could also, and I can export that one. There's also this thing so you can see your silhouette. But you want to see if it's like flowing nicely. All the shapes are flowing nicely into each other, and you want to be looking at that from different views, right? And so yeah, and so some of those things, obviously you're going to be making up because you don't know what your character looks like from different views, but you're going to be using references. So there's a couple things here, and we'll block them out. So first is that a lot of these shapes are just round, like spherical shapes. There's not like they're all just kind of blobby and they all just bulge in the middle, right? A lot of the, if you look at here, he says mirrored shapes. What that means is that the shape is the exact same on both sides of itself, right? So if you drew a center line, you can see this shape is the same on this side as this side. This shape is the same on this side as this side. This shape's the same on this side and this side, right? And then the shapes aren't like really specific to silhouette. You can see bulge, 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 right? Like there's not really a specific kind of flow that it's going for. Right here, you can see this is too complex. And then there's not good transitions, right? Like what I was just showing you guys where I'm trying to get things to flow. Yeah, and also too high resolution. That's going to make your work slower. It's going to lead to like really bad like shapes that are hard to work with. It's going to make it be a lot simpler. So here's another one that he did, which looks way better. And if you want to, I recommend starting from like nothing and kind of trying to match this. That's what I did for mine, which was I did this on a different character. Let me see, let's pull my reference. Okay, here we go. So you can see I kind of did it similar to him, right? Where, I was trying to make, this was like, I started out making one of those like this. You guys don't have to get this like deep, this many pieces for hands or even the knees or, even some of these torso things, especially since both of you guys are using like female characters. But then one of the first exercises we had to do was like make 3 different mannequins out of the same exact mannequin. So I like took this mannequin and then I, changed the proportions, moved things around to make them look like different characters. And it's supposed to be just really fast. And so that's kind of like what he's doing here, right? So here you can see he has like clear specific lines, there's a much better flow. You see it says more interesting forms compared to the mirrored ones. And that's because they're not quite symmetrical, right? They have like a little asymmetry to them, which make them more interesting. You can see here logical transitions, right? So here we have like anatomy hit shapes, like these are reflected in anatomy, right? Like in terms of how the body kind of changes in real life between these different areas. But that requires just studying some anatomy. You can see that flow in the neck is way better, right? You can just go stop and then it goes there. And it's not bad. It's just, this one, he says it's bad, but I don't think that some of the stuff up here is not bad, but anyways, so you can see the resolution's way more low res, so it's easier to work with. Let's see. And then I think he's talking about some other things. Okay, so one of the things that's really important is balance and then also rhythm. So balance is essentially like, does your character feel like they're going to fall over? It's like you're drawing a plumb line. Usually you want to draw a line from like around their ear down through the ankle or to the feet. And so you kind of want like an even amount of mass on both sides of it. And there's like a natural rhythm. You can just copy and look at like side reference pictures of characters to get a sense of how they are balanced. And so you can see the character's like center line, quote unquote, it like flows, right? Like if you draw the center of their mass, like it kind of flows like a gentle S shape, right? But then there's like this kind of like center line from the ear down to around the ankle, right? So you can see if this character is leaning forward, like that ear is like drops down to here, and you can see the distribution on one side to the other side, like they're really far apart, right? Like up here, the whole top half is over here, and the bottom. It's kind of hard to explain, but you'll get it. And then also in terms of like flow or rhythm, he's talking about like kind of this alternating of like shapes in terms of curved and straight, right? And so he avoids things like parallel shapes, right? You can see like here, parallel, which kind of makes things feel a little weird. Paying attention to how things taper, right? Like taper is very natural, especially on a body, especially on stylized characters, right? A lot of your pieces, you will come up here a lot of your pieces are going to change shape from their start to their end, right? They don't always go like from fat to thin, fat to thin, fat to thin. But you can see, look at all these shapes. Like this starts thick, goes to thin, this starts thin, thick, thin. And where it starts and stops is really important. So having that natural taper is going to be something you're going to want. So by having something that's perfectly parallel, unless your reference specifically has that, then it's not going to be something you'd really want. And you can see here, it's like a lot of repetition of the same shape isn't as nice. And so you have this like night. And then a lot of this is also just built on like human anatomy stuff. Let's see what else. So on this one, I wouldn't worry about making your character like you can see he's kind of talking about like making your character less just like straight up and down, even in the neutral. But I think that's something that you guys don't really have to worry about. So another thing I would do is I would look up for gathering your own reference and keep looking at reference. The way you want to look at it is I'd probably go to Pinterest. Pinterest is almost always like kind of like the best way to gather this kind of reference. 1970, January 1st. Always just give whatever a fake random birthday. Happy birthday. There you go. All right. So let's go ahead and search for, I would say things like planes of the body part. So if you're thinking of like planes of the torso, right? You'll usually get some really good references that are like stylized. So that's one of the key words for looking for stylized anatomy is just like planes of the blank. And you can see there's some of these are like very simplified, and some of them are like general or like less intensely simplified. Let's see. You can also search for stylized anatomy. So you'll see a lot of like this kind of stuff. Stylized anatomy is honestly more fun if you're making a male character just because you can exaggerate a lot of those forms. But you can see some of these ones are a lot more in depth. You guys don't have to go like this level. But maybe you can get like some information on how these shapes can be simplified and articulated. You can see this one's kind of like what I did on mine, where I was like breaking the head into simpler shapes as well. So this one, like, even though those shapes aren't as nice, you can see that's kind of like a general level. Oh, here's one this one, oh, I don't know. This is one here, right here, which I was kind of referencing in this one right here, kind of like when I was doing that like test block in right here. So you can go, this one's by Polygon, I guess. Oop, let's go ahead and bring this up. So you can see this one was the one I was kind of referencing when I made mine and looking at his male and female character. I just did it my own. And if you're not super familiar with what's it called? This program, Pinterest, this website, then you can you just scroll down if you want to see other things like looking at similar references if you're just trying to find like things that are similar to an image you found. Something else, let's see, I think it's like Shu Chem, I'd say anatomy, Disney. I can't remember his first name. I think it's like Shu Kim. Because they had these really great anatomy breakdowns, but so anything where you can find people talking about anatomy, but showing in like a stylized or simplified way is really great. And looking at like characters that are characters you really like this character who was I think the original kind of designed for Flynn, right? Seeing how they simplify those body parts and the anatomy hits, especially on really stylized characters, are really good. Anyways, let's look at a few more of these. So here we have like a very great example of just like breaking the body and the main silhouette and even those limbs into like big chunky pieces, right? Let's go ahead and open this image up. Let's see if there's anywhere else. So here's some other ones that are kind of useful for understanding shape language of your character. So just analyzing some of these things can be really helpful for like understanding like how your character should be kind of broken up. You guys are both doing like thin female characters, so there's like a certain body type you guys are going to be following, but it is still helpful to look through is looking like, is your character like primarily triangular where they're like they're widest right here at their hips and it tapers up to their head? Think of the typical like masculine character who has like this triangular, upside down triangular, where they have really wide shoulders but narrow hips? Are they like a beanstalk? There's all kinds of kind of ways to break it down and look at it. So just showing a few more examples of people doing that kind of stuff. Here's one kind of showing a breakdown of the face into planes, but this is much more complex. Like, you guys don't have to go that way, of course. Let's see, what other ones did I open up? Here, we'll close that one. I was clicked on this one because I really wanted to find, I thought it would bring me to the Disney artist. Well, so there's other ones, like you can see someone breaking down like this body type from what's her face from Lilo and Stitch, the older sister. Here's something about like head proportions, so it's from the same thing. Man, I really just want to find that one reference. Okay, well, anyways, we'll just keep going. This is a great example again of just breaking things down into simple shapes. Oops. Let's see, we'll close that one. That was the one that I opened. I mean, like I said, the rhythm of how the pieces flow into each other isn't as nice, but that's like a really nice simplification, something that you might want to take a look at. Let's see, this one seems pretty good. That's okay. Sorry, I'm still looking for more. Okay. Like this one, I don't really like how they're like, like the proportions obviously is like, a certain like taste that somebody has. But, and you can see also that he names it booty, whatever. But that kind of shows you sort of like also like how those anatomy hits can be like stylized. We really don't actually need to look at that one. Let's see. This one I think is also actually Dylan Ekron, the guy whose guide we were just looking at. Oh no. So I guess I can see it. Dylan Ekron. His stuff is like really, really cool. So I definitely highly recommend looking at his stuff. But and some of these things, I'm going to save these images off and then I'll share them with you guys. But you can kind of see he has all kinds of different like character body types. Not all of these are his, like that's not his, that's someone else's sculpt of his own character. But if you can find like, and there's more probably you can find through Google. But if you can find his stuff, he'll have like progress pics and they kind of show you like really nice ways of like stylizing or simplifying anatomy pieces. Let's see. Okay. You can find these later. View image. There you go. So this one you can kind of see like it's kind of nice to see other artists how they do characters in the round. And when you say in the round, that means like thinking about them in 3 dimensions instead of just one view. So being able to kind of like study other people's work that's really good, that you think is really good, can be really helpful. Let's see. Sorry, and I spend a lot of time looking at reference. So, but like I love like how he does this. This is kind of like how I like to do things. Is like that clavicle shape. You got that deltoid. You got like the simplification of the bicep and tricep into an upper arm and then a lower arm, and you're looking at like that rhythm of the arms. You can even see that on this one, like that rhythm of the upper arm and the lower arm, even though this is like a really stylized character. This isn't Dylan Ekron, this is someone else's. Let's see. Let's look at planes of the arm. The arm. And like studying, like I said, just studying anatomy and reference is really important. So here you can kind of see the relationship of, let's go ahead and close that, this one to this one. So you can see like we have this like deltoid shape, right? And it kind of bulges out here, but it's like thinner here. But then of course, when you think of a bicep, that bicep bulges forward, tricep bulges back. So this goes out to the side, then front and back, and then the forearm goes out to the side, right? And you can kind of see that in this, right? You have like this bulges out to the side, front and back, and then the side, and that overlapping where they overlap is really important. So looking up this kind of stuff and looking up these references is really handy. Another thing that I like to do is I like to use what's called Anatomy for Sculptors. It's a book. I'll include that as well. But it's a book for just about thinking about anatomy. And so they have some really great simplifications, like 3D simplifications. So you don't have to go into like specific muscle groups, but thinking of how that arm can be broken down and simplified, for instance, is really helpful. Okay. Don't worry, I'll have these all saved off. I think I was pulling up this one too. I think this one looks pretty good. And then there was one guy who's like, I think is Seville, stylized. He has like a crazy name. It's like Bryce Seville something something something. Let me see. I would recognize it from a mile away if I saw it, but I'll have to look at it later. But his was like one of the first the ones I was studying in terms of like the shapes that he was using. So anyways, so lots and lots of references. Here's those examples of how to do like head block out shapes, right? So I did something very similar where I just kind of like broke the head into like a cranium, a like jaw face part, and then like the bridge of the nose. Like I think he breaks down stuff well, but I think he's actually not an amazing like his stuff isn't like my favorite stuff. Like this is a nice model, but then some of them I think his just like style choices are kind of weird, so he's not my favorite artist, but I think he does have some like that one's a pretty good model. That's like really well done. But like so he breaks them down like this, and again like it's the same kind of concept. So I'll make sure to include these as references. Okay, cool. Yeah, and so we won't be able to go over a lot of anatomy stuff just because there's so much. So just make sure you guys like build up a good reference library. And I have like, and I'll put more stuff in here, but you can see this is like a folder this is one I had made for when I took his class, is for my character that was done in that class. The next thing you're probably going to want to do, and I'll save and put all these images in there, is you're going to also want to analyze your reference. So you can see here, this is the reference I was working from. And so what I did was I did a kind of like a draw over of the different shapes in Photoshop. So I just kind of like drew over the different major forms or major pieces. So you can see like I took this, I drew over those pieces. So I just went into Photoshop. I set like a white fill layer over my image and dropped the opacity. And then I was like kind of drawing the major body forms of her, of where I thought she was, especially when she has clothing on, right? Like I was trying to draw where I thought her hips were. And so I was breaking it down to that. And then to make it easier on myself, what I ended up doing was one, I made it symmetrical. So I drew like a straight line down and I mirrored it across. And then two, I like kind of dragged the limbs across. So if your character though, like I was lucky because my character is facing forward, so your character might not be doing that. So if that's the case, then this might not be a step you want to do. But you do want to, I think doing something like this where you're drawing over and you're blocking out and figuring out like those major shapes of the character is useful. So even though your character might not be symmetrical, you can still, do that, right? Like you can still kind of draw over and think of like those big major shapes that you want to go for. Cool. Okay. So you can see I just have a lot more. Oh, let's delete that one because that one's tiny. But I have a lot more references, including some like simplification of oh, that's not simplification. That's mine. Like a simplification of anatomy. Oh, come on. You're right. Okay, these are all from anatomy. So these aren't simplified, but even if you're not looking at simplified, that's okay. Okay, I think this is his stuff. TV Choi. That's who I was looking for. Sorry. You got to take a TV Choi. I got my Disney concept artist mixed up. So TV Choi has got a lot of like really great like design guides, especially related to anatomy. So definitely recommend looking up his stuff on here, right? Including like I like this kind of stuff, which is like, kind of like very different body shapes, right? And proportions. So her work is really good, really good. Okay, cool. So let's go back to and I'm gonna probably have this on like, so that's what I'll do is I'll have you do something like usually put up like a pure ref, save all my images, and then I'll take like all these images and I'll go ahead and drop them into pure ref. What I do is then I grab all my images, I do Control Alt and then like left or up, depending on how I want to kind of scale them. So it essentially tries to match them all to each other's scale. We'll press Control P for packing. And then usually what I'll do is I'll sort them by like type, right? Like I'll do something like, here's all these kind of like ideas of how I can make a mannequin, right? So I can go ahead and pull all these ones down here. And then some things which are like real pictures or even body parts, right? Like, so I might look at this for like the arms, right? I'm trying to figure out how the arms work. Things like this are really great also, again, for like kind of simplification, understanding anatomy and how things fold together. Right, here's some more arms. So anyways, I'll usually just like, let's pull these guys down here too. I'll kind of sort these out. And so, this is taking a while, right? Like you guys are like, okay, this is taking forever. But this is really helpful, right? Like I think this is like the time you spend with your reference is literally studying, right? Like even just looking at these images and thinking about them for a second, is like kind of analyzing and understanding them, right? Just like looking and like analyzing these images will ingrain it in your head, and then like later on it becomes like second nature. So a lot of things I might do, not like I'm a pro or anything like that, but a lot of things I might do when you see me work is I might just do stuff without looking at anything in particular. And that's just because I have like kind of built-in knowledge of things like I think this reference is really interesting because this is like a 3D scan of a person, but like the rhythm of the back into the neck and then like the shoulder and clavicles, right? It's like she's got like this natural hunch, and the shoulders are forward, right? Like they're not like pulled back all the time, depending on the person you're sculpting. But of course, then you have this like character who's like the superhero character, and his like shoulders pulled back. So anyways, all that fun stuff. So let's go ahead and I'll pull this on my other slide or other screen. So come back in here. All right, so what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and whatever reference image I have, I'm going to go ahead and go to my texture. I'm going to go ahead and import, and we're going to go ahead and I put this in my downloads folder, and I put it in the reference. Okay, let's go ahead and view extra large icons. So I would do something like, I probably need to crop it, but probably grab something like this image right here, where and let's go ahead and open that with Photoshop really quickly because I need to crop it. Actually, I don't know if I need to open with Photoshop. I can just probably like open, and then I'm just going to go ahead and, since I'm on Windows, I can just do this. So actually, well, so I would do like this kind of draw over, like if you did one of those like this one. Oops. Like this one, if you did this one, I would just bring that in maybe, or bring it in separate images. But in my case, I'm going to bring this one over just because, it works for me. So let's go ahead and save it as a copy. Actually, I already have that as a copy, so I don't need to save it. Okay. Yep. So I already have that as a copy right there. So let's go back into ZBrush, bring this image in. Okay. And then the texture goes up into here, this image. So I'm going to click on it, and I click on this button right here that says add to spotlight. All right. Spotlight, you just press Shift Z to hide it. All right. And then you press Z to edit it. So Z lets you like move it around, scale it. So this little wheel doodad thing, I'm not going to go into all the pieces of it, but essentially it lets you like scale. You click and drag in here to move it. And then you have things like, I wish they highlighted, but I think this one right here is opacity. Yeah, like opacity. So we'll use this as like a reference. So another thing I like to do is I like to try to like, well, what I'll do is I'll like line it up to my reference. So let's see, and you can see I changed my character. This is a much later one where I like actually moved her arms out even further away from her body. But what you'll do is like a lot of times I'll do like Shift Z to, let's go ahead and let's see. You could do orthographic, but we want to keep perspective on if we can work with perspective. Well, you can see this changed a lot from this one. Okay, anyways, and then once you have a nice camera that you like, depending on which version of ZBrush you're using, you can go into the draw menu, and there's this little camera menu right here. That's not what we want. We want down here, camera. And so what you can do is you can click on store camera and just name it to call it, I don't know, reference check. Let's call it that, reference check. Okay. And then click, and then so you can see I put mine right here, and I have store cam right there. But wherever your button is, whenever you like move or scale and do stuff, you can always click on that and your character will your view will go back to it. So, you'll want to go in here and you'll want to be like changing shapes, moving things around. And then if you just need to see if your work is still holding up against your reference, you just go back here. Cool. Depending on your reference, you might have to just kind of break away from your reference a little bit, right? Like if perspective isn't making sense, like it's a concept drawing, right? Like things get kind of stylized. So if your character is like posed in this view, right? Like let's say like this one right here, right? Like it might be kind of hard to get this pose and not make it like if you looked at it from a different view, your character is like really broken and weird. So it's okay if you have to break your reference, but you want to match it as best you can, especially in this stage, right? Because if you get all those anatomy hits or like those proportions right, and then the silhouette right, while you're in this stage, then you have a lot less work and clean up later on. Like you don't have to worry about stuff so much. Okay, so let me go ahead and I want to merge these down. So we're going to merge down really quickly because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy paste. All right, sorry, I just want to, oh wait, no, I just want to clone tool. Sorry, don't worry about what I'm doing right now. I'm just trying to get this so that I don't have anything else in here. All right, so I wanted to do this so I can split these to parts, just so we can pretend, I say, okay. Pretend that I've been building this up as pieces and this was like in the middle of it. So let's go ahead and these are all probably fingers. Yep. Finger, 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 finger. Okay, cool. So I can just merge those guys down. So let's go down to merge down. Okay, merge down. Okay. Until you get really experienced, don't say always okay if you can help it, because that's a good way of losing your work. So merge. Let's merge these guys down. Merge down. Okay. So I'll like kind of build these up piece by piece, or I'll probably like keep some of the pieces and then just show you guys creating another one from scratch. So actually, let's go ahead and do this. We'll do this. I'm going to take all this and then I'm going to click on this little start button. You can see like if you click on this little arrow, it kind of like creates a start thing, which it means like it's really for booleans, so don't worry about it that much. But if I grab the top thing and I do that and then click on that, everything below it is controlled by its visibility. So you can click on that right there. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to insert a new sphere and we're just going to block in the torso of our character. And again, I'm going to be pulling some of these, and actually let's go ahead and pull some of these up. Let's go ahead and do something like maybe these ones. So I'll pull these ones up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just, pure ref magic this guy into place just so I can have it as reference. And we're going to, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab my pure ref, right click, mode, always on top. All right. So, and then I'm going to go ahead and start doing some sculpting stuff. Okay, cool. So in terms of shader presentation, by the way, if you don't have or you don't want to use those, a lot of times what I do is I work with basic material and gray, Zbrush paint, and then like a colors just to make it look a little bit nicer. But I like to kind of understand my forms very early on, without a lot of like, shaders getting in the way. So, I mean, these are all the shaders that I like, but if I did, let's say like something like this can get a little confusing and weird. So, I like to work with something that's pretty basic. All right, so the first thing I'm probably going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dynamesh this object and let's go and turn on symmetry. I'm going to dynamesh it just because, by default, it's going to be just higher than I really need it to be. So we'll click on dynamesh. Actually, let's go ahead and ZRemesh it. We're not going to dynamesh it. We're going to ZRemesh it and kind of try to get it as low as we can. All right. Another thing we can do is we can then turn on dynamic subdivision. So dynamic subdivision is like preview mode. Say yes. And so dynamic subdivision, it lets me go ahead and work with a really low poly model, right? So you can see, say always yes. So you can see this is really low poly. It's very elastic. It kind of responds really well what I'm doing, and it looks smooth, right? And I might go ahead and just add a single subdivision by just pressing Control D, but dynamic subdivision is still on. I put mine up here, but it's found underneath the divide or geometry divide menu, or no, sorry, dynamic subdivision right there. So anyways, so let's go ahead and pull up my reference. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my camera. Let's go ahead and, camera. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the move gizmo, and I'm going to go ahead and just like kind of get it into place in the right scale. Let's go ahead and scale it up a little bit. And so in my case, I'm going to be breaking up the torso into like the upper rib cage shape, and then the lower like kind of like abdominal and lower back shape. And again, looking at a bunch of references as we go along to kind of get a sense of how to do that. And let's go ahead and I'll add one more in there so that we can have it pulled up as reference. Let's see, because I don't have any of these ones. Let's see, Shift Tab. So this one is pretty good. So I'll just copy paste that one in. And let's see. I was thinking this one wasn't bad. In terms of like showing the separation, I don't really like the proportions and the style of that one. Could be a lot better. And I'll probably be looking at the TV choice stuff too, because TV choice stuff is really good. As you guys can tell, I have never taught this before, so I'm kind of pretty new to how to show you guys how to do this kind of stuff. But we're going to do our best. All right, so let's see. Here's another TV Choi thing. TV Choi is so good. Let's see. Wish I could find more of their stuff. All right. Oops. This one looks pretty decent. It's kind of nice there, kind of breaking it into those basic shapes. I'll show you guys in a second. I'm saying that as you guys can't see it. Let's see. I want to make sure I have this. Okay, cool. All right. Sorry, I keep saying all right as if I'm moving on, but I'm not moving on because I'm still looking at stuff. I can spend forever just looking at reference pictures, which I guess to some degree can be like analysis paralysis, you guys. It's always a good idea to get something onto the page first. Okay, anyways. All right, so some of these were pretty cool. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to grab all these, rescale them proportionate to each other and press Control P. This one's kind of nice. I like how they kind of, you can see they're kind of breaking this into like the rib cage, and then like this kind of like underwear shape, and then the head shape, right? And you can see he does that up here too, right? And then just connecting them together. So, you know, through all this stuff, we're getting some really, really good. It just makes me easy to see solid shape. Okay, so there you can see they're kind of like, this is how TV Choi is like breaking like the anatomy up into simpler shapes, even though it's not necessarily anatomical. Okay, cool. And here's like a real simple one. So I'll be darting around like always. Okay, cool. So so let's go ahead and we got that into place. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start kind of like getting these shapes in. So I'm gonna kind of have like I'll start with like the shoulders and then like the back of the rib cage. So if you look at a simplification of the rib cage, you'll have like a flat up here. So pro tip, when you use the move brush, when you hold Alt, you move along the normal. So a lot of times if, you know, otherwise you're moving according to the camera. So if you see me do something like this, and you can see I'm like pushing and pulling towards and away from the surface, I'm holding Alt. So it'll become second nature eventually, but just be aware that's something. So I'm going to be kind of like getting like some kind of simplified rib cage shape, and that's sort of this like this kind of shape right here. I'm building in a little bit of the actual shoulder stuff, so you can see eventually we're gonna build out the shoulders with like the neck muscles, the deltoids, and all that stuff. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and build that in first. Okay. And so next I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to here, reference check. And you can see I got a little too wide, so I'm just going to go ahead and check against my reference. And her rib cage needs to be a little bit longer. So she's got like a tall, long rib cage. So let's go back out here. And if things start to get a little too like bumpy, I'm just going to go ahead and smooth it out or ZRemesh it. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do is I can go ahead and probably you have two options. If you have subdivision levels, you can't really do much, right? Like you can normally hold control and drag to duplicate it, but it says this has multiple subdivision levels. So what I can do is I can probably just delete my higher subdivision levels and I can just click and drag, right? Another thing you can do to duplicate, and you can just work in the same one, or you can just go ahead and duplicate it and make it a different subtool. Right. And so there's a certain point. I don't have like a really good rule of thumb of when to do that, but just a thing. So let's go ahead and go back against our reference check. And so I'm probably just going to block in the pelvis area. So we're just going to go ahead and block that and just get it to more or less the right shape. Okay. Cool. Oops. And so for this part, I'm going to go ahead and look at some reference to get a good sense of how this is going. Let me see. In this case, I probably want to look at, let's see. So this is the downside of me not actually organizing this ahead of time. Let's see. What would be a good reference? Oh, this one. This one's kind of nice. Cool. So I wish I had a side view, because it's really helpful to see it in the side view. But I'm going to go off of like memory a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of like give this a little bit of a flat top. It's going to be a bit of like a underwear shape. Over here we kind of have like the top of the pelvis, and then down here, this widest part, like right there, which will be covered by the legs for the most part, is going to be the connection point for the what's it called? The upper thigh bone. So if you look at here, you can see this transition here, right? This is like the hip bone down to here, hip bone down to here. And that there's like muscle and stuff like that. And then, the upper leg starts out further out, and then the knees come in like that. So you get like this kind of like rhythm that goes like flows in like that. So if you look at that right there, right, hip bone, that outer thigh mark, and then it kind of arcs in. So that is what I'm looking for. Where was I? Here we go. Okay, cool. Cool. So then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and, and you can see I'm just keeping this pretty simple. I'll study and look at some of the ways that other people are kind of like blocking in those forms. Sorry, let me just double check. Might pull up my own reference and just go off of mine a little bit. Where is it? So there's that one. Where's the one where it's just the guy? There it is. Okay. So I'm going to drop this, or actually it must be in here. But just to save myself some time. Okay, cool. Sweet. Not a great what's it called? Standard to set is working off of your own reference, but that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, cool. So we got this kind of underwear shape. I'm trying to make it kind of like vaguely in the shape of like some like whitey tighties, right? And we'll go from that. Okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and I'll just insert a new sphere. So we'll go ahead and insert a new sphere for the middle torso area. So we'll do sphere. Let's go ahead and scale that down. And I can kind of build it off of what I have here. Let's go ahead and ZRemesh it down low. And oh, that's a little too low. And then just turn on dynamic subdivision. Let's go ahead and scale it up. Or actually, let's go ahead and Dynamesh this. Let's just Dynamesh it really low. Dynamesh. Not super. Okay. Yeah, that doesn't look great. So yeah, let's do ZBrush. Sorry. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and I'm kind of like this middle torso is going to be like this part right here is going to be like the bridge or connection between the upper and lower body part. You can see I'm kind of, oh, let's turn on symmetry. I didn't turn on symmetry. Let's go ahead and ZBrush that. Okay. So this is just like kind of like the connection point for between the upper and lower body. And it'll have its own anatomy hits, especially depending on like how stylized or not stylized your character is. So let's go ahead and just pull that forward. I wish I removed the arm. That would have been nice. But this kind of transitions down into the back. And this one goes up here. Oops. You can see I get pretty messy when I do this. I don't make these shapes perfect. I make certain ones better because eventually what we'll do is we'll just Dynamesh them together. And we're not going to worry too much about, the topology of these objects pretty early on. Okay. So making it a little wider as the transition's there, but there's likely going to be like a point where I'm going to have a narrower kind of lower back muscles. And then this kind of transitions up into the deltoids, or not deltoids, the trapezius, like back and shoulder muscles. Okay. Something I'm noticing with this is I probably want the pelvis to go backwards a little bit more. So let's go ahead and again look at some of our references. Here we go. Here we go. This one kind of shows me a nice rhythm of the body. My character's like stylized, so I'm not, not everything's going to be this exaggerated. If you want to switch to another subtool, just hold Alt and you tap on the subtool. You can see mine don't change color like by default. If you go under edits, you guys have this inactive subtool dimming. And so you can see like, depending on which subtool you have clicked on, it like highlights, but personally, I don't really need that, or I don't find it as useful. So I usually just turn it off. All right, so I'm gonna come over here, pull that torso out. You can see the rib cage is like the widest, like right around there. Again, within reason, I'm not gonna like, copy every anatomy hit because that's not the point of this project, right? And then we're going to go ahead and move the pelvis back a little bit. And we want to make sure it's kind of like, you can see there's that like pelvic hit, right? That like of that pelvic bone right there. And cool, yeah, it actually does look pretty good. Okay. A lot of times for like buttocks and stuff like that, I'll just depends on how stylized my character is or not. Is I'll just draw on a basic blocky shape, right? Like we have on this guy, right? You can see his butt. It does have like the planes of the butt area, but it's very, very simple, very, very stylized. Here you can kind of also see the separation of the rib or the rib cage object shape to the back muscles. So in this case, I might want to make my character's rib cage torso object like a little bit bigger, and make that gap between the pelvis and the like this transition object, which represents like all of our abdominal muscle stuff. I'm going to make that as short as possible if I can help it, depending on my character. But in most characters, that like the rib cage and the pelvis aren't that far away from each other. But there's just certain areas where this transition area is like bigger. And I'm not like the best at terms of like working on what I'm supposed to be working on, and when I'm working on like characters, in the sense that I'll like focus and nitpick on certain things that I really don't need to be focusing and nitpicking on. Because really the first, what we really need to do is we just need to be blocking in the entire character. So let's go ahead and go back to the reference checker. You can see like the hips need to be coming in. So The downside of keeping things separate is that the upside is it's really easy to select and move them and do your own thing, right? Like I can move this, I can rotate it, I can scale it, right? The downside is in this case, if I want to pinch all like the hips in right here, including the transition mesh, I can't do that, right? Because they're separated as separate objects. So I'm going to keep them separated for now, but there's ways, and we'll talk about it more later, about how you can actually have combine those together. Like obviously we can just combine them together and not use move topological, but use the normal move brush, or we can do something called transpose master, which essentially takes all your little separate tools, puts them together, and then you can move them, and then it separates them back out for you. And keeps all of your like undo history and all that cool stuff. But let's not worry about that. Okay, cool. All right, so I need to stop messing around with this stuff. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do a pectoralis shape. So actually, let's go ahead and block in the arms. Let's do that first. So let's go to reference check. I'm going to go ahead and insert a, in this case, I'll insert probably like a cylinder. Again, I'm going to go ahead and Z-remesh it really low. Probably lower than that. So let's go down to here. Oh, let's turn on symmetry. Z-remesh. Okay. And turn on D. Okay. And so then we're going to scale this down. Let's go ahead and show my reference image again, pressing Shift Z. And so I'm going to go ahead and scale it down. I'll turn off symmetry now. I don't need symmetry. Let's go ahead and rotate it. Move it. And then we'll go ahead and scale it to get its position. All right. And then at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and start messing around with it. So let's go ahead and move it. So, this is going to be, if you hold Alt and click on this little button right here, what it does is it resets your pivots orientation, so your transform tools orientation, because before I do that, it's like oriented to this. So if I like had it like this or something like that, and I wanted to move it straight forward or straight back, I can't do that. So if I hold Alt and click on this, and when you hold Alt, you unlock the transpose tool, because by default, whenever you do these things, it does stuff to your transpose tool, right? Like you can't move the gizmo without moving your mesh as well. So if you hold Alt though, or you can just click on this, now it's unlocked and I can move this around and it's not like affecting the mesh. But the shortcut for that is Alt. When you hold Alt, it goes ahead and unlocks it. So I'm going to go ahead and move that back. Cool. And actually, let's go ahead and I'll reorient this a little bit close to that, and then we'll just go ahead and scale that a little thinner and then scale it back to where it should be. Okay, let's check really quickly. Okay, cool. So on this, I'm going to keep this part pretty simple. I'm going to taper in the edges or the ends, because that's going to make it easier for me to like weld pieces together. One thing I'm noticing when I look at my reference is like around up here, she has like it's kind of flat on the inside, and then it's kind of rounder on the outside. It's like a design choice that kind of made based on the reference. So we'll just kind of pull that up. Let's go ahead and bring it, Z-remesh it again, because we changed the shape quite a bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Okay. Now I'll keep that area in there kind of flat. You can see this feels round here, but over here it doesn't feel round at all. So I'm going to use, I can just pull things around. I'm going to instead use inflate. And so just use a really low Z intensity, or maybe not that low. Let's do like 5. So I'm just going to go ahead and just add some volume into this. Be careful, because it's a easy way to just make your mesh just like big and floofy. And then if you could always run like a polish if you want to kind of like smooth or average out, like if my mesh gets a little too like that, and it's low poly enough, you can run like polish to like smooth it out and get it a little bit simpler. But of course I'll lose like most of the definition or shape I have. But in this case, I think it's okay. In this case, I'm not going to worry about, so let's go ahead and do reference check. Okay, I made the arm too thick, so we're going to come up here. Okay, and so let's go ahead and pull that there. And then since this is so low poly, what I can do is I can just to use smooth to shrink it down. Another thing I could have done actually is you use inflate, but with inverse. So holding Alt, and that can like kind of push the mesh in. So that's another way you could do it if you want to kind of shrink your mesh. Okay, cool. So let's go back to reference check. Right, so I feel like there's like a bit of a different rhythm hit right there. And anyways, okay, cool. I'm getting really, really stuck on making things perfect, which again, I really need to not do. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and not actually make another subtool, but so I'm going to go ahead and press hold Control and click and drag. So that's just going to give me, and I'm going to hold Alt to bring the pivot point up here. So that's going to give me a nice lower arm for now. Let's go back to looking at the reference just to kind of line that up really quickly. In this case, my arms are kind of like angled down, which I did make a change later on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out my mask, because what it was is whenever you do that, whenever you do that, right, like you control drag, it masks the original. So they're still part of the same subtool. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clear that out. And I'm going to actually rotate the shoulders a little bit. So let's go back to here, reference check camera. And I'm just going to go ahead and rotate that down. Let's scale it out a little bit. There we go. And then what I can do is then just use the move tool to start position one. And her arms felt really weird, I remember at this point. So like I did, that's the corrections I was making. Like I went a little off reference around this time because I was trying to get it to feel good in 3D and not just against reference. You can see over here, this is one of the reasons why I like basic material, is you can feel the concavity and convexity, right? Like when I rotate around this, I can feel this feels pretty round, right? Like there's some little tweaks and adjustments, and that's the part that takes forever, is just getting the curvature and the shape just right. But you can see here, right, like that feels round, but then you can get around here, you can see just from the shadow shape that this is pressed in and concave. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and, using Alt, just pull that out to try to help round that out. Or again, like I could have used something like the inflate tool or inflate brush to kind of get that there. And so this forearm's getting a little thick, so I'm just going to smooth that down and pull that down there. And then this is probably around the point where I'll be looking at like how to like make the upper and lower arm distinct from each other a little bit. You know, again, my character's very, very stylized. So compared to even this, right? So I'm not going to be you know, like following this too much. But one thing that I always recognize or think about whenever I do arms is that the bicep and the elbow always kind of like push down into the lower arm and vice versa. So like, and this is where you know, they're kind of overlapping each other, so it's hard to select one or the other. So at this part I might just like split them. So let's split the parts, say okay. So now I can move this without accidentally getting that one getting in the way. So, you know, I'll frequently like split and not split things. So, you know, this is one way we can do this. Another way we could do it is just like, we could make a, let's move this one instead. We can make like a little elbow object, just like how we can make a knee object. Not like this character, but like these characters, right? Like you can see I didn't make an elbow object for this character. You can see I kind of drag that elbow down and overlap it. And so you can see like, again, going back to that chain, that link of chains thing is like the lower or the upper arm overlaps like in the forward and back position, right? And then the lower arm does it from the side, right? Like this, kind of comes up like that. So these are like really small things, but these are like the rhythm of anatomy that you know, I'm going to be paying attention to. And I can already tell like something I don't like about this so far is that like these both seem very much the same shape, like you know, and they're very mirrored. So that's something eventually I'm going to want to work on, is like how do I differentiate them? How do I make these like more interesting shapes? But I'm not going to stress about it too much right now, because, you know, I want to make sure excuse me. get everything else in. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little deltoid shape and then the bicep and then the pectoralis shape. So again, I'm going to come out to, one of these references. Let's go here. Let's go to, I don't want the muscular man. Muscle man. We can do something like this one. So we can look at something like that. All right, so I kind of like the shape that they're getting right there. So I'm going to really quickly block that in. Okay. And then pro tip, the wrist is flat. It's like more like where the wrist connects to the hand, it kind of becomes like a cube compared to like the upper part right here. And something you can do sometimes is like if I click on solo, if you ever want to kind of view this thing is we can do select lasso. So holding Control Shift. And then let's turn off double-sided, turn on double-sided, which is found underneath display. You can kind of see like the cross section, right? So you can see it's like round here. And then eventually when I'm like polishing and making my shapes more clean, down here, I might want to make this, like a little bit square, right? And so that when I go ahead and do a cross section of this, right, we'll do Control Shift. It's too low poly, but come on. Yeah, it's too low poly. But then I'll get like a different cross section of that part. But I'm not thinking about that too much right now. But anyways, okay, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and insert in. So we're going to insert in a new cylinder or sphere. Sorry. If it's a limb piece like a leg and arms, I usually do a cylinder. But if it's anything else, I usually just do a sphere. And then I'm going to go ahead, but unless your character is like super blocky or your character has very hard planar shapes, then maybe I would do something else. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and again do a low Z remesher and then turn on dynamic subdivision. No symmetry on this bad boy. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use this to represent the deltoid to clavicle shape. And I might go even lower. Let's go a little lower. Z measure. All right. So just like how, the lower arm like intersects up like a link in a chain here. This one goes forward and back. This one's going to go sideways as well. So lower arm goes sideways, deltoid, shoulder muscle, that's what the deltoid is, goes sideways. So extends out sideways. So if you guys need to, I can pull up that reference again of the simplification of how the arm shapes work. And I know what I'm going to have to do is like, these are pretty broad shoulders for my character. And I know she doesn't have shoulders quite like this. But I'll worry about that after I kind of get some of these shapes in. So that goes there. Okay. Oops. Pull this out a little bit more volume. Okay. And then I'll worry about it right here, but there's like a bit of that armpit, the shape of your armpit is like your arm. Gosh. Pull up my reference. So I'm going to pull open more anatomy references, just like my anatomy reference folder is like gargantuan, right? Like I have something like I think like 20,000 pictures or something in here. So it's over the years I've just been like, every time I'm doing a project, I'll look up on the internet, try to find reference for something I'm looking at, and then add it in. Her shoulder. So just keep that in mind. That's something that you build up over time, and I recommend having like a go-to that you can always go back to. This is called écorché. Écorché is like this concept of your body, but showing the skeleton and musculature with like the skin pulled away. So if we take a look at this, you can kind of see like there's the pectoralis. You have your typical like what you think of as your pec muscle, right? But then there's this transition piece right here, this upper part that connects underneath that deltoid, right? And then the bicep and the arm goes up underneath it. So we're going to be creating that. So that's kind of like part of like what makes your armpit your armpit. Let's see if this one shows it a little bit. Yeah, so here you go. Here's like a pectoralis, goes over there. But you can see if we move the deltoid and that pectoralis shape, right? Like the arm goes up into and underneath these guys. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. So let's go back to ZBrush. All right, so we got the that shape there. Let's go ahead. I'm just going to duplicate it. Just why not? And we're going to use this as the pectoralis. It's not the greatest shape for me to be doing that with, but I don't care. So let's go ahead and find a good here. We'll do something like this. It's very, very musculature, but that's okay. We'll simplify it. So first, the pectoralis goes. Sorry, there's like a GIF playing in my periphery, and it drives me nuts. So one of the downsides of Pinterest. There's a lot of advertisements. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pull this shape up, and so she's gonna have like she has such a really long rib cage. Like I don't want like a really long pec muscle, and she really like at a certain point she's like gonna have no pec muscle, right? Like I'm gonna like essentially obliterate it. But I like to personally, this is my personal style, unless I'm doing something very, 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 very stylized. I like to kind of get that shape represented in there. And then kind of break away from it. And I think that's probably like differing opinions, and Jeff might have a different opinion than I do about this, Jeff Hayes, about like, do you represent those anatomy things or do you not? And I'm kind of obviously of the camp of start with more pieces and then I simplify and smooth them. So let's go ahead and Z-mesh that again, just because I changed the shape so much. And we need to make this a little bit simpler. Something we can also do is, let's go ahead and do this. Before I do that, let's go ahead and subdivide. When you can do like a Dynamesh and then turn on polish, which is found under your Dynamesh. Always yes. And so what that does is, Dynamesh. Oops. Okay, sorry, one second. All right, so here's that. Let's delete lower. All right, so let's say this is like my geometry. Let's turn off dynamic subdivision. And come on. Divide. Okay, cool. So let's say this is like kind of the shape I had like mushed into place, right? There's this thing right here called clay polish, which is found under the geometry tab. What clay polish does is it like smooths out like the flat areas and then and sharpens and enhances like edges. So every time you draw it, it kind of like makes you this like simpler stylized shape, right? So if I came in here, and this is worrying a little bit too much right now, too much on about this kind of stuff. But if I had drawn like an edge like that, and then I use, let's go ahead and use plane, fill in that gap a little bit, and then maybe use like a little bit of hard polish to kind of flatten that, right? And then I just run clay polish. You can see it kind of like respects and enhances that kind of planar shaping I've made, right? And Dynamesh with polish turned on kind of does the same thing, right? Let's go ahead and go a little higher. Dynamesh polish. Maybe it's because I have a mask on. I don't know why it's not going higher. Weird. It's like almost Z remeshing it. That's so strange. Okay, one second. Let me look at this. Right, geometry. Let's delete lower. Let's go to Dynamesh. I have polish turned on, and I click on this. Okay, now it works. All right, I don't know why it didn't do that. So you see, even like if you do Dynamesh with polish turned on, if you're like just, some people like to work with polish. The only thing I don't like about polish is, or Dynamesh instead of Z-Remesher. The only thing I don't like about Dynamesh is that it doesn't work super well with the dynamic subdivision thing, but it's your call. The nice thing about Dynamesh is if I turn on Dynamesh, right, I can do like big form changes, and I just control click and drag on my mesh like I'm clearing a mask out, and you can see it automatically recalculates my Dynamesh. And so I can keep going, Dynamesh, keep going, Dynamesh, right? And it just redistributes and your topology density based on the form and volume. So it's great for when people are doing things like whatchamacallit,
Horns or something.
sure, mostly for like concept sculpting. So if you're just like playing with shapes and like trying to figure things out, and you're just like playing around, it's very fast and it's very fun. But in this case, we're not really doing that. So let's go ahead and just go back, get this back to ZRemesh piece, and we can go a little higher. ZMesh, sure. All right, and then turn dynamic subdivision back on. Because again, I'm not really, not super interested in like getting those major forms or anything like that. Again, I'm going to cheat a little bit and go back to how I was doing it for my character, because I am confused about what I'm doing. So here we go. So you can see on this case, well, I mean, there's also the breast shape, but in this case, I got rid of that. In this case, I didn't actually really do that. You can kind of see it a little bit right here. I did do it right there for that character. So let's go ahead and we'll just do something similar. So we'll just go ahead and get like a shape like that. And this just tucks up here and will become eventually our armpit. So, and I'll just go ahead and smooth this stuff out. So that's the, okay, yeah, sorry, I'm not on the right one. There we go. And we'll do that. So this kind of shape on the torso, this is something I'll go ahead and mirror. So all my mirroring things are under this little menu. So if you press A, I have this little like pop-up menu that has like a lot of the functions and things like that, just to save some space on my UI. But this is found, mirror and weld is found, mirror is found under deformation, and mirror and weld is found under geometry, modify topology. And that's why I put it in here, because that's really annoying. So I'll mirror it and then mirror and weld. The reason why I mirror it first is because it almost always does it from the positive to the negative direction. So you can, and then I'll turn on symmetry again. So we'll just go ahead and move that into the center. And if it's getting too big and too prominent, I'm just going to go ahead and simplify it a little bit. And then I'll probably like add in like a breast shape as well, just to kind of like on that character and some characters, it's like easier to see like kind of the forms and rhythms. But obviously for my character, she has like this shawl kind of shape. And the reason why we're doing some of those things, like you don't have to do that, like you really don't. But sometimes like this is kind of like going through this exercise, you're going through this practice of like building out the body underneath the clothes, right? Because realistically, I only need her arms and legs and her neck, right? But I went through this whole process because, it makes it, when I like start posing her, and even where I put her clothes, right? It makes things feel more realistic and believable, because it has that sense of form and anatomy underneath that I'm like kind of following along with, right? So yeah, anyways. Let's go ahead and do that. And so, yeah, like I said, when we go back and we look at this over here, like you can see in this case, I kept it pretty, in this case, I wasn't doing that torso, what's it called? Pectoralis shape here. Here we can kind of see how I ended up doing the rib cage. I was making a lot of this stuff up, of course, because I didn't need to, and here, let's turn this on. I'm pressing Shift F, and you can see all the polygroups. I'll turn off line so we can just see the objects themselves. So you can see all the different little pieces. You can see I have like this. We'll do this right here. We'll do neck, and then we'll have like a little transition piece here, which is like the neck muscles, which are technically connected with like these muscles back here. So yeah, so I might come back and look at this just to kind of get a sense of how I've been simplifying. Again, here's like, this has the planes and shape of the butt, right? Like, there's a Shift F. There's like a side plane here. There's an upper plane here. There's a lower plane here. And just like the hips, it's like, in this case, it's like narrow here and wider out there, like I'm on my other one. But yeah, and you can see, I obviously spent more time than what we are doing in this call, right? It's not something that just like magically happens. So in this case, let's go ahead and I'll just try to figure out where this is. Pull this down. All right. You guys really don't need to do like all the things I do, to be completely honest. Okay, cool. All right. So one thing I want to do is let's go ahead and mirror that object. So let's go ahead and mirror and weld. And I know her shoulder's going to be too wide, but let's go ahead and reference check. Yep, too wide. So that was a really big challenge with my character. Was that this area up here got really, really narrow. So like all these pieces, like the chest area, even the rib cage, like I had to like keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking them and pulling them in, but still keep the sense of anatomy alive. I mean, that was something that I wanted to keep that sense of anatomy alive. And so, it took me a long time to kind of narrow it down and get it going. So yeah, pull that over, put that there. And something I'm focusing too much on is like specific areas when, like I said, what we really need is we really need to get the rest of the body in. So let's go ahead and get the head in. So we're going to go ahead and insert, a new sphere. And we're going to go pull this one up. And I'm going to go ahead and pull some of these references over. Let's go ahead, and some of these are really dumb looking, but I like the concept. So you can see here how I kind of broke my character's face down. And this is a little bit more detail than you guys need, right? But this was like for that other project, how I kind of drew over and broke the face into multiple parts. Let's see. But you guys can totally do like this kind of head shape, right? So this is kind of cool looking. All right, so what I was doing, copy, is I'm gonna go ahead and we'll do it kind of like this style, which is like the two-part head shape, right? So if you, again, we want to do things like you want to go to Pinterest and you want to search for things like planes of the head. Okay, let me go ahead and really quickly. All right, cool. I had to check my time. Okay. Right. So you can look up planes of the head and you can see like these kinds of simplifications. They're like almost like helmet images or helmet objects. One of my favorite ones is the Asaro head, which is what this one is. But maybe for this kind of thing, it's like a little too complex. That's that one right there. But you can look up like simplified or stylized head. That'd be fine too. But even if your character is really stylized, like understanding kind of like the general shape where things are forward or back can be really helpful. Let's do head construction stylized. Let's try that. See if that gives me anything. Not really. I mean, I love this as another anatomy for sculptors. Here's one. Kind of those ones right there. And again, all these images I'll save off and I'll put in that reference folder and I'll upload that reference folder for you guys. And again, I mean, like look at stylized characters, right? Like this is probably something that's close-ish, like the typical pretty character or cute character, female character is probably closer to what Veronica is going to have like that kind of style. And then, Nini, yours is going to be very different, right? Because of that nose and like the proportions. So we're going to have to figure that out. So you might want to find similar characters like this guy. And like I look at style, just like I look at anatomy, I look at other stylized characters all the time, just to kind of like study them, especially if they're in 3D, right? Like, and I'll just like study them of like, what are the planes of their face? Look at that one. I mean, I don't like those cheekbones actually, but just like that stylization of such an exaggerated face is really cool. If you're going for more stylized or really exaggerated ones, you can look and you want to see 3D. You can look up Max Skrecki. So Max Skrecki, he does these like super, super planar and stylized characters. Like, look at that. That's crazy. I love this, like this guy right here. But then if you look up 3D sculpts of them, it gives you a really good idea of how people like interpret that in 3D. Like, how do you look at his image, and then how do you make a 3D character? So let's say sculpt. Another thing you could say is sculpt, or ZBrush. That's another thing that you can sometimes get. So here, let's see. That one's interesting. Some of them are successful, some of them aren't, right? But since he like really simplifies or really exaggerates like the planes and landmarks of the face, one, it can help you kind of see things, but two, it can give you a sense of how you stylize anatomy, right? Like how these things you learn from anatomy are stylized. Oh, that's great. Like look at those, all those marks. Those are very good. Let's see some other ones. That one's all right. This one's great. You guys both doing female characters, so eventually, like one of the things about female characters is that how smooth the or how clean the different body parts are, right? Like that face is overall very clean and smooth, and then you have these like intense landmarks of the eyes, right? And the nose and the mouth, right? Like the major landmarks. But then usually when you have like masculine characters, you really enhance and exaggerate a lot of those shapes and planes. So anyways, cool. All right, so let's go back to, so here's some of that stuff I was talking about, like the simplifying of the head. Here's another good one. So I'll probably grab some of these ones. So copy image, paste, and copy image, paste. Did I? Okay, there we go. And not that one. That one's kind of weird. And let's see, I like this one. This is Anatomy for Sculptors book again. And this one again is like breaking it down into like a really simplified, like how the neck structure works. Again, y'all's character is probably going to end up depending, like, let's see. So Nimi, your character is most likely going to be way more simplified in terms of like, you're probably only wanting a tube for the neck. Whereas Veronica, you have some leeway in terms of if you want your character to be a little bit more anatomical. So it's going to be kind of like up to you guys. So anyways, so we're going to take this head. Let's go ahead and scale it down. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go to my reference checker. I'm going to go ahead and get her cranium up. So we're just going to do this. And so then what we can do is we can do something kind of like these ones right here, where what I can do, let's see. Okay, I keep saying what I can do. Let's see, zero mesher, Dynamesh. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull a second shape, and that's going to be the lower face. So we're going to scale that down a little bit. So I'm looking at like, we have that cranium shape, and usually we kind of represent that as like its own sphere, and then like the face comes off of it. So the face, is like flat on the, is kind of like flattened like that. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure it's symmetrical. So let's go ahead and mirror and weld. Oh God, okay. Before I do that, let's go ahead and make it symmetrical. All right, cool. All right, so then I'm going to just go ahead and move that up. Move that in. This is a weird way of making a skull head shape, but I'm going to try to stick with it. And I don't think I did a very good job right here of like, as you guys can tell, I'm like, I haven't done this kind of stuff in a long time. But anyways, there's great videos out there. One of those people who we keep seeing references from is, his name's Polygon. And so you can look up his and he'll have like head sculpting and block and stuff. But anyways, it's been a hot minute for me, that's for sure. Anyways, okay, so we want to kind of flatten this side of the face, so, or a skull. So what we can do is we can either use like trim dynamic, so you can do that, or maybe let's try hard polish. There we go. Let's try hard polish. Since my model's so low poly, that kind of works out. And yeah, cool. And then for back here, I'm probably going to just, let's make sure my character is symmetrical. Sometimes they get asymmetrical, sometimes they become symmetrical. And I'm just going to kind of pull in the back of the cranium back here. And so for my character, right, like what I did was I kind of gave her, or I did a different approach on this one. So you know, I kind of did this approach right here where I was kind of like blocking in sort of like an upper and lower half and focusing more on the eye line, like right here. So what we can do is let's shrink her chin a little bit. Narrow it down, smooth that out. And then what we can do is, you guys don't have to do this for this week because, you know, again, we're trying to keep this pretty simple. We want to focus on the main primary shapes, but, you know, we can go ahead and we can kind of block in the eyebrow region. Let's go ahead and mirror and weld that again. Or actually, let's even mesh this guy. There we go. And so the mouth comes out forward a little bit. There's the cheekbones. And again, this is something that like how I'm doing the landmarks is kind of based on my own understanding of how anatomy works, like on a broader level, like looking at that like a sorrow head thing. Let's see, let's pull that in a little bit. And then we'll get the neck in a second. Ears, I would just do like a little cut disc or something like that. Let's go ahead and also, before I get too much further, I want to look up a good example of stylized character. Just like how I have a lot of reference for anatomy, I also have a lot of reference for just stylized characters, just tons and tons of, oh, there's another one where here's like anatomy breakdown, kind of simplification, but not as useful as some of the other ones we have. Here's another Dylan Eckern one. Again, like seeing those rhythms of the body, but in a very stylized character. I'll add that to the reference list. But then, you know, you got these ones right here that are, you know, a little bit more just straight up stylized, right? Like you have a lot less of those anatomy hits, but you got that like forearm distinction, which is great. You have the rhythm of the legs. Cool. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. I'm trying to look for some face references for a stylized character. And one thing you can look up that's really good is here's one. So this is pretty good, kind of showing like for like a stylized character, like from the side, especially a female character, like that mouth, nose, you can call it like quote unquote the muzzle region, which sounds kind of like gross because it makes them sound like they're an animal. But people kind of describe that nose mouth area on stylized characters as like kind of protruding forward, which is not like exactly what happens in real life, but it's like how we often stylize characters and make them feel like cats, kind of, you know, like you got that like kind of push out. We'll get some more, and even on like, you know, Rapunzel from Tangled, right? You get a little bit of that, and you know they kind of pull it back a bit, but that's kind of what we're going for. So again, I'll try to include all these images if I can. I like this one right here, though. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead and take this right here, and I'm going to put it in here with these references. You see, I get a lot of references, and then I don't use some of them, but I honestly think that's totally okay. The more references you look at and the more you like absorb stuff, the better, right? So what I might also do is I might go ahead and I'm going to, let's pull in a bit of the cranium. I'll let her head do, or her hair do more of the talking. Here's her eye socket area. Let's actually, for eye socket area, I should probably check against my references. So her brow region is like a little lower. Her whole eye socket area is like down lower like that. So that intersection between that top cranium object and this bottom object, I'm kind of treating like the eye line, like where the corners of the eyes would be, more or less. You don't have to do that, but that's kind of how I'm doing it. Let's see. Let's go ahead and just smooth some things out. And let's go ahead and go back to the side. So I might pull this back a little bit. And so this is another point where, these not being separated is kind of annoying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split them. So split to parts. Say, okay. And let's go to this one. And the ear is like the junction, the corner of the jaw, let's go ahead and block an ear so you can see the anatomy hit for it. So let's go ahead and add insert sphere. I'm going to solo this just so we can look at it. I'm going to use a tool called trim curve right here. And so when you hold Control Shift, which is usually your selection tools, and you click on that right there, you hold Control Shift and drag it out. Whatever's on the side, on the other side of this black line is smushed down, right? So you can see, everything on the side of or that shadow area gets smushed down to the line. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Maybe kind of flatten it a little bit. Let's go ahead and Z or mesh it with it at a pretty low subdivision level. And what I could do is maybe just, let's try on lines to see what this looks like. Yeah, what I can do is just push it in for now. And I'd probably just model this object again later. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and I just want to block in objects. Cool. Okay, I'm nitpicking. So let's go ahead and pull that up where her ears are. So scale that down. Pull that up. So the ear is usually halfway, like the beginning of the ear, the front of the ear right here. The jaw stops, the corner of the jaw. You guys can feel it on your ear. The corner of your jaw and the back of your jaw, lower jaw, stops right before the ear. So the ear comes right behind the jaw. And that line right there is almost always like where half of your head is on your cranium. Like one half is in the back behind it, and one half is forward. But on a stylized character, a lot of times what you'll do is they usually have more face than cranium. So you usually might maybe have that a little pulled back, but it's a good reference point. The other thing is they usually don't stick straight out like that. So usually it kind of feels more like this, right? And let's go ahead and just pull this in a little bit and shrink it down. Other thing that you guys probably, maybe if you took a light drawing class, know is that the brow region, which is like, so here's my brow area, which is the top of my eye socket area. I guess this is really low poly. I'm just using Damien standard to draw it out, right? So that's like my eyebrow area. Usually that's where the top of your ear goes, and then the bottom of your ear goes to where the bottom of your nose is. But again, stylized characters, that rule doesn't really apply. It can be it doesn't really matter it's up to your reference. And then again on this ear, let's go ahead and skip this note. I'm just going to go ahead and get this to kind of represent an ear a little bit more. I don't know how I magically just did that because it's already starting to feel like an ear. I had no plans in mind for that, and it somehow kind of worked out. So that's great. Love it. All right, so we have that. That's great. That's a good reference, and I might diminish its appearance or effect. Cool. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to go ahead and insert in the neck. So this one's definitely going to be a cylinder. I recommend for a more anatomical approach to look at something like this. So one of the first things you'll notice is that the neck isn't just straight up and down, right? And then the head, also the neck doesn't insert halfway into the skull, right? It's like not dead center like a lollipop. Usually, again, stylized characters, you never know. So usually it kind of connects back a little bit. So it connects more, like you'll see like a connection point right here. So let's go pull this up, and let's go and just scale that down. So it intersects. It's really thick, so she has a really thick neck. So I'm just going to go ahead and get it to be a bit thinner. Again, check against my reference and get a sense of how thin her neck is. All right. And then we'll just go ahead and scale that back down. So one thing I'm noticing first is I want to go ahead and I might scale that up and then pull it back again. And then again, we want to look at some of these references, look at that one looks like they just put it straight into the side. Sorry, I'm trying to find a good side reference where I like the results. Okay, here you go. That's a little bit more humanoid. I guess you can see it kind of like on this character, right? Like that again, like that center of the neck is kind of like behind the center of the ear. Something that I need to do though is I need to probably pull the neck and the head stuff back. So what I'm gonna do is if I can switch to the move gizmo. If I click on this button right here, I can transpose multiple subtools. Just control shift click on them. So you can see if I control shift click on this, I have the neck selected. And then these pieces, I'm just pressing control shift, which is the visibility default. And I'm just going to move this stuff back. So I'm going to move my character back. And if we go back and look at that, let's go to reference. I'm going to go to that Dylan Ekron PDF. Wow, it's taking forever to load for some reason. We'll go down to that like rhythms of the body one. So you can see here, like, again, like where that ear and that shoulder fall, right? And it's like which parts of the body come forward or behind other ones. So you can kind of see on this character, like the ear, like there's more torso in front of the ear than there is behind the ear, right? So we're kind of doing that same kind of concept. Is like there's more torso in front of the ear, and like the neck is a little bit. The neck is a little bit back on the head. Okay. And I need to kind of like looking at that reference, I'm going to play around with this a little bit and make sure that this I can kind of see stuff behind the what's it called, behind the arm, because that's what my reference looked like. This shape right here looks like more like that, like visible in all three views, even though it's going to be pretty tame. Okay. This one right here, I'm going to use this to kind of create like the clavicle kind of shape. So even though I'm not going to have much of a pectoralis, something I did have on my character, if we go back to here, when I started doing more complicated stuff, is not that one. Oh, it is this one. Okay. So let's turn that off. There we go. So you can see I did get like a clavicle, and you can see the deltoid shape, and you can see the armpit shape, right? You can see I did simplify the neck quite a bit. Here's the kind of, I was figuring out kind of the planes and shapes of her face and this, but this was like this is like next week. This is like you figuring out those like more complex things. So you guys don't have to do all that stuff right now, but it depends on how quickly and how successfully you feel like you're capturing things and things are going. Obviously I have experience doing this kind of stuff, so I might say like, man, it's been a while, but I might also probably be going really fast compared to like how you guys might go. Who knows? I don't know. Clavicles, kind of have like an arch to them. This shape right here, I'm going to go ahead and kind of bring it down right there, but then pull it up. I'm just kind of combining like the chest. I'm not going to represent every single like muscle group, right? I sometimes just use an existing object to kind of represent something. So I know the clavicle technically like goes out to like right there. So you can see like that bone right there. But we're not going to go again that anatomical on my character and on y'all's characters either. Let's see. Looks good. That's fine. Okay, cool. So for that back neck area, let's see. First, I'm going to go ahead and we're add a little bit of taper to the neck. So what I might do is I'm just going to kind of smooth it, holding shift. So it's going to get a little skinnier. So I want it to go from like thicker down here to skinnier up there. Let's turn on dynamic. And then so from the front, we want it to kind of feel just like cylindrical, right? Like we want it to kind of, just like almost like a hourglass. In my case, I kind of like widen it up here because for me, it's like this part back here is going to get really weird, right? Like if that's like my neck and that's my skull, like that just looks really strange. So to simplify that, make it simpler, like it's not represented in my concept, but I kind of like widened out the neck and got it a little thicker as it went up, to make that feel less strange. All right, so you can see, like, especially on like a character with a thick neck, that's really easy, right? This is like what happens is like the jaw is slightly wider. You can feel it on yourself too, right? Like you feel your jaw is just slightly wider than your neck as it connects up into the cranium. And you can feel that point, that bone right behind your, the part of the cranium right behind your ear where the neck muscles connect to it. It's just slightly narrower than your jaw, right? And that's kind of what we're doing here is like, the jaw and these muscles are, I mean, like these muscles and that connection point is slightly narrower than the jaw, but with a stylized character, especially with a big head, right, that means something completely different, right? So anyways, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to that neck, just keep working on the neck. And it's very easy. The problem with the neck is it's very easy to lose it's like simple shape, right? Like you want it to kind of stay simple, but it's very easy for it to get kind of like wobbly. And that's something that with stylized characters, and you guys, I'm sure, will inevitably encounter, is it's very easy to eventually end up with like kind of like a wobbly form that doesn't feel very good, or doesn't look as clean as like your references, like if you're looking at other stylized characters. So just keep that in mind. It happens. S happens. All right. So I mean, I did this with like as one object, but we could do it a lot like this one right here, right, where we kind of like made, you know, these like overlapping shapes, right? We have the trunk, and then we have these like that. This is like the delta or the trapezius, which is like this muscle. Here we go. Perfect. So thank God it's right there. So this trapezius, that's what's like kind of like gives you that shape of that like kind of shoulder bump as your neck transitions. So, you know, on a feminine character, that's going to be like very subtle and very soft shape. You know, I did that as one object, but we could insert like a sphere, right? Like we can do like a insert sphere, move that up. Let's turn on symmetry. Move that up and scale it down. Z-mesh it low. Turn on dynamic subdivision. And then what we can do is just then like kind of get that transition. So if I was making it like a more muscular character, it would probably look something more like this. Let's go ahead and Z-mesh it again if I'm changing its shape so much. And then so you have this kind of sit into the top of the shoulders, right? There's usually like kind of flat. Oh, that doesn't look good. It doesn't work when her arms aren't like, or her shoulders aren't like massive, right? So normally you have like something kind of like this, and then like I said, the clavicles kind of come up like, or don't come up, but they're kind of like visible like that. And then these the trapezius, the deltoid, and the pectoralis all kind of like meet kind of like this a little bit. So on like a very character with a lot of musculature, and even like a real person, like you'd have to be pretty ripped to have kind of like this. But you can kind of, you can feel it, right? Like if you squeeze this, like, you know, if someone like pinched your shoulder, like when you think of someone squeezing or pinching your shoulder, that's this muscle right here, and that goes down to your back onto your scapula, or not, yeah, your scapulas, which is your back shoulder muscles. But you can see it and feel that clavicle, right? Like you guys can see it goes, feel it. It goes like the nub of it's like right here on the top of your shoulder, and then you can feel it kind of come down, like it's, and it's shaped a bit like a bow and arrow, and it's shaped like a bow, and it comes around forward, right, like that. So anyways, so let's go ahead. So in this case, I don't need this one though, so I'm going to delete that one, and then I'm just going to Control Z those back before I did that. And Control C this one. Okay, cool. So I'll just probably leave that one for, I like that for now. Because we're running out of time and I don't want to get too complicated. Cool. Another thing I might do is, I'll do this later, but this area right here, a lot of times people just do this where there's like this huge overhang. But a lot of times I'll, you know, actually like have this transition, because that's usually what happens is you have like this kind of like esophagus, trachea, I don't know which part that is, kind of comes forward like that. And you can kind of see that here, right? Like you see that right there. And then you can see it, not on that one, because I guess that one's not as good as I thought it was, but you can see it like here, right? This person decided to kind of have that transition, represent that a little bit better. Same thing with this one. On mine, you can see I kind of did that with a lower jaw. I actually had that, like kind of have that like softer transition. A lot of times what people do though, and I kind of did it here and I could clean it up, is just, like have this as like a flat, have this as like a really strong like stopping point. So one thing you could do is, instead of dragging it forward like I just did, another thing you could do is do like insert cylinder. Actually, let's do it in here. So what we're going to do is brush insert primitives. This is kind of a dumb way of doing this, but let's see. Primitives. And then I'm going to do, I could do a cylinder. Oh, I did half. Brush insert primitives. This one right here. There we go. Let's do a capsule. Oh, shoot. There we go. Okay. So now what we'll do is click and drag. Oh, click and drag. Come on. There we go. So what this does is essentially drags like a primitive onto your object. So, you can drag primitives and work with them. But what I'm going to do is, let's turn symmetry off a little bit. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and reorient that. Sorry, I know I kind of used to that. I don't want to get into it too much. But the insert multi-mesh brushes, there's one that for primitives. Insert multi-mesh brush is a brush that just has models that you draw onto the object. Or onto your subtool. So then what I could do is then rotate this, and then have that be like kind of like a trachea sort of thing. But I don't know, kind of weird. It's not something I guess I would normally. Oh, I have a hotkey for Control 1 for automatically soloing. I forgot that. It's been a while since I've been in ZBrush. So you could do something like that, and then eventually, like those will dynamesh together. And make things. So cool. I think I'm gonna have to stop soon. I want to make sure maybe I'll point out instead, like some things to keep in mind. You guys kind of get the idea of how to make this stuff. Um, Something like I've kind of been harping on is like I think one of the hardest parts when you're learning is well, there's a lot of parts that are really hard because it's anatomy. Anatomy is really hard. It's like very complex. And we're doing anatomy, but we're doing it in a simplified way, which thank God. But it also means that you kind of have to understand it a little bit in order to like accurately represent it, right? Like those let's go to that image I had of Dylan Ekren's work. I guess there's that thing. Let's see, was it here? There we go. Control tab, 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 tab. Shift tab. Let's go here. Okay, so let's look at this one. So even this is like super clean, super stylized, very simple shapes. But like a lot of those like anatomy things we're talking about, you can kind of see them represented, right? Like you can see them represented on that, like that like deltoid of his shoulder, how his neck, the trunk of his neck connects into his top of his torso and the shoulders. Got that clavicle hit, right? Going right there. That kind of gentle sloping up of those back muscles, right? So just more examples, but even on like the most stylized characters, we're going to have like that sense of anatomy. You don't have to go like even as far as I do, right? But it can, just make sure that you guys are representing it somehow. Okay. That was all over the place. Let me go ahead and stop, or I'll keep sharing for now, but I'll go ahead and if you guys have any questions, go ahead and say them now.
I do have some questions.
Yep.
Thank you so much for the demo.
Yep.
It was very
Oh wait, sorry. Before I talk of like I said, again, look up simplifications. But one of the things I was going to talk about was the feet. Like you kind of want to make a shoe shape. And that now I remember what I was going to say. Sorry. I'm going to take this opportunity to say it. So you can see I kind of made this like very clear shoe shape. Look up how to make like a stylized shoe or foot, or simplified, not stylized, simplified, because the foot, much like the hands and much like every single part of the body, is very, 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 very complex. And you can end up making this like really simple and stupid looking kind of like blob, but like this is like a really nice stylization. And on mine, let's go to this one. Mine kind of looks like this, right? So my character was floating, so I kind of made her feet like this. But I kind of made it like almost like the shape of a shoe practically, and that gives you like a very blobby, simplified form of the feet. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Veronica.
No, yeah, of course. First of all, just as a to clarify, if character is still wearing clothing,
Mhm.
we need to do body and then we
Um,
somehow like extrude clothing on top
No, I
of that.
wouldn't extrude clothing. Extruding clothing is only something I would do if you are like doing something like a t-shirt, right? Like if you did a t-shirt, like it would make sense for me to like take my, let's say for instance, we'll take this, I'll duplicate it. Let's go ahead and I'll just let's delete my subdivision levels. Let's clear that mask. I'm going to do a lasso mask. And so let's say I like do this, and I would instead do this inside of like Maya or Blender. But maybe you want to create your clothes inside here, right? So you can do that, and then you can like extract a shape, and it's like already shrink wrapped to your body, your character's body, and it's already like kind of like matches their form, and then you just like clean it up and you retopologize and all that stuff. So if you're going to have like a really small piece of clothing or a tight piece of clothing, you could do that. But like on my character, I want to make sure I save this. So also, by the way, let's go ahead and delete this. Delete. Okay. Delete. Okay. I have a bunch of like extra subtool or tools that I don't need. So let's do file, save as. We'll just do demo. Demo. And I'll open the other ones to show you kind of how it was going when I did it. And I would do it slightly different. But I wanted it to be very stylized. I wanted it to be really simple. So here is costume. And kind of see where I was at when I was blocking in the clothes. But my character has like loose clothes, right? So I was getting really simple primitive objects, right? And in my case, I like working in ZBrush, so I was staying in ZBrush, but you could totally do this inside of Maya or Blender. And so I was like working with like really, really simple, clean meshes, right? And you can see it like, I would extrude them and add thickness. Things like this, like I just did a little quick, like these are just donuts and, or not donuts, toruses and like little cylinders that I made for that tie. In this case, you could see I like made the collar separate, but in the end, I made it not separate. So if I open like how it looks later on, so let's see, close, probably this one's probably closer to being the finished one. So I mean, like I was blocking them out like that, but I still like worked from those meshes and kind of kept going from there. So you can see if I look at this, right? Oh, why did her clothes disappear? There we go. Okay. You can see like I like modeled this, and then I like I'm sure I have it somewhere and we'll get to it, but I was like, doing step by step, making those look prettier. Um, on like things like this, what I was doing is I was like sculpting in like stylized cloth folds, right? Same thing with this one, right? So it started out with like really simple shapes, and then I started sculpting them into place. But one of the things, and some things like these right here, they're just like simple primitives. And I just made them inside of Maya because it was really easy. The staff, obviously, I sculpted it in ZBrush. But there's this thing right here, like this waist tie, right? This thing I actually made in Marvelous because it was really complicated. Well, well, actually, you don't know what she has behind her. So I was like, oh, maybe she just tied her shawl like this. And so, I made this like kind of like she wrapped a piece of clothing around her waist and she tied it off in the back. So I made that Marvelous. You guys could totally, depending on the style, like I really wanted mine to be super clean, stylized. But and that works for me for this, but it also means like I couldn't do some things, like I couldn't put my character in like neutral and the clothes would work, and they're just, I don't know what I'm saying, but essentially another approach I would have done was like if my character had a t-shirt or jeans or jacket or something like that, I probably would have constructed it in Marvelous Designer and then simmed it onto her body and then brought it to ZBrush to make like clean it up and make it simpler and stylize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. What I was asking, you mostly answered my question, but what I was what I meant was for example, if we have a jacket, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like puffy, and do we still just sculpt the character's body, or do we
Yes.
still okay.
Yeah, so I think it's a good exercise for you. I mean, Jeff can tell you differently, but and go from what he says. But I think like I was showing you guys like that, like kind of analysis of what I think her body looks like underneath.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's a really good exercise to go through. And if you are going to do something like Marvelous Designer, right, like you need a body to do stuff onto, right, like to actually construct stuff onto.
Yeah.
And then also, like I said, like for instance, by doing that, like I could get an understanding of like the shape of her torso, and then all these other views that kind of get a sense of how her clothing worked, right? Because I had built her anatomy up first.
Yeah, and I also was thinking, because me and Nina were taking Ben House's Houdini class right now, maybe we could do cloth sim in there, or do you think like it's not like character oriented at all?
Well, no, I mean it doesn't. If you're doing Houdini versus Marvelous, like I'm not worried about that part.
Uh,
But for y'all's characters, considering how stylized they are, I don't think you really actually want to sim. Like you don't want
yeah.
like all your folds and cloth. Like you're not going to have to do stuff a lot with simming.
Mm.
Like you would only really want to do simming to just kind of like get it to wrap or sit on the body, in a believable way, and then you can go in and clean it up and move it around.
No, yeah, that's what I was talking about. That like create a base, a sim base in Houdini, for example, and then sculpt like folds on top, like in a ZBrush or
Yeah, I
something.
mean, I think if you guys want to use Houdini for sure, yeah, that's totally fine.
Mhm. Yeah, gotcha. Just something that I was interested about. And another the last question that I have is I don't really understand difference between Dynamesh and Zero Mesher and
Okay,
subdivision levels. If
sure.
you could
Yeah,
explain.
that's a great thing that I probably should have started with. But let's go ahead and sorry, I'm loading a project, but it's like 2.5 GB. So there we go. Um, let me end. So now I'm just gonna go do a new project. So let's go ahead and you can press the comma key to bring up this lightbox, which is like the content browser. It shows up when you start up ZBrush. It's like one of the first things. So if I'm going to start a new file, I almost always press comma and then do the default project. Let's go ahead and stop. There we go. All right, so let's talk about the difference between ZMesher and Dynamesh. So in order to do this, I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the geometry tab. So let's go down to geometry. So let's see. All right, so first thing is this right here, polyframe, shows you your polygons, right? And let's go ahead and do Zebra paint, just because that makes it like a little bit lighter. And the shadows aren't quite as dark. What happens is whenever let's do like the classic is like a snake hook. So a snake hook kind of pull on my model. So yeah, I don't care. So as I like drag my object and change its form, like if I change my object too far away from its original like volume and shape, what I'm doing is I'm really pulling and stretching polygons. And what I could do is you can see up here, right? Like I'm getting these really crazy stretch polygons, right? So down here, I have like enough topology to like play around with and do stuff with, right? But up here, I really don't, right? Like I can't get any definition up here because I don't have enough topology. So usually a lot of times the solution when you're in a situation like that, if you need more, resolution to make finer forms is you subdivide, right? Like you add a subdivision level, add a subdivision level, add a subdivision level. So right here, we are subdividing, right? So, and you can jump back and forth between, low and high subdivision. We'll talk about that in a second, but, you can do that. But the problem is I have down here my active polygons, and I think by default it's like up here. I have like 700,000 now. And so let's go over here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to use Damien Standard. So Damien Standard is one of those brushes for sculpting that really likes high resolution, right? Because you're starting to do like creasing and sharp edges. Let's come up here. So you can see even still, even though I like subdivided like 4 times, it's still really hard to work with, right? One, because there's still not enough topology, and two, the edge flow is really bad. So, maybe I want to subdivide it a few more times, right? But now I'm at 11 million polygons, right? And so I can kind of get it. Again, the topology edge flow isn't really good, so it's not helping. But there's like, it sucks because up here, I'm having to subdivide my model a ton when down here, I'm jumping down subdivision levels. I really don't need that many. Like I'm now at 2 million, right? So this is 2 million. And if I jump up to 11 million, you guys can't tell the difference, right? Down here. But up here, right, it's like a huge difference. So like my density of polygons is not the same. So anyways, so that's where Dynamesh kind of comes in the early stage. I'm talking about like early when you're blocking in shapes. So if you run Dynamesh, let's go ahead and run Dynamesh. So if I look at this, let's go ahead and we'll go back down to like a low subdivision level, and I'll delete all the other subdivision levels. So I stretch out these polygons. You can see the density of polygons is not the same up here. So if I run Dynamesh, so let's run Dynamesh, you can see it redraws the topology of my model. And it's mostly just doing it to have an even distribution or density of polygons. That's what it's worrying about. So it's a really fast and quick calculation. And so if I did this with like maybe like a higher resolution, so let's go ahead and do Dynamesh, right? Then I have like, this same resolution. So it's not good for detailing, but, as I'm working, right? So let's do like clay buildup. Let's say I'm kind of building up some forms, right? Like, let's say we're like kind of like, I don't know, I'm making like some kind of goblin-y creature or dragon, I don't know. So I'm building out its like, what's it called? Eye socket region. I'm going to pull forward its muzzle, right? Its snout kind of thing. Here's its jaw. You can see I'm not, making anything serious. But then when it, the topology is like kind of crazy, right? So I just run Dynamesh on it, and maybe even like a lower resolution, so it's like more responsive. And so there you go. Now it's like even density, and I can keep playing around, right? Like I can go ahead and start adding in like forms and volumes for different areas of the face, locking that in. And so yeah, so that's kind of what Dynamesh is it's just for the primary purpose of it is for like really quickly remeshing your model so you can go quick. So you can like make all these big changes to my model. Like I can do trim curve. I can go ahead and like cut those down. Let's do symmetry. Oh, okay. I thought that worked with symmetry, but I guess it doesn't, right? So let's go ahead. Oop, we can do that, right? And if I look at that, that's like terrible. So I'll just Zbrush or Dynamesh it, right? So that just closes it off. So the other thing that Dynamesh does is let's go ahead and do brush insert. Oh, let's see. Let's do brush insert. I think there's like parts, like body parts, but yeah, let's do this one. Let's add something to him. Let's add an ear. I don't know. I just want a different model. So let's say we have this like weird ear model, and I'm going to go ahead and insert them like that. Let's make sure they're intersecting. All right. So, like problem is like I want to clean up that transition between them, right? Smooth that transition, but they're separate models. So with Dynamesh, when I run Dynamesh, it welds them, right? It like physically connects them together. So that's the other use of Dynamesh. But sometimes that's a bad thing, right? Like sometimes you'll have like, let's see. I don't know how to do this really easily, but if you had like a cavity here, like let's go ahead and I'll just insert a some tool. All right, insert. cylinder. So let's say like, I'm not going to mess around with this too much, but let's say I had like this was my character's lower jaw, right? So let's go here. And then let's go ahead and do trim curve. Oh, like that. And like, oop, like this. Let's do mirror weld. Okay, so let's say I had something like this. Let's go ahead and looks stupid. Let's go ahead and just like Dynamesh, or I'll ZRemesh it really quickly, just so it has some kind of form, and then I'll merge them together, right? Merge that down. Say okay. And so if I was like making like the cavity of my character's mouth, right? And I have these like kind of close-ish, right? Like I want to kind of close my character's mouth, like something like this, right? Dynamesh, it can be kind of problematic, right? Because it doesn't know, it's going to like weld from a certain distance. Oh, got asymmetrical. But if I go down to geometry and then I Dynamesh, you can see like it closes this gap right here, even though I might want that separate. I want it to weld here, but if I Dynamesh it, you can see it welds there. And the lower your subdivision resolution is, the more it's going to like close those gaps for you and make that decision for you. So sometimes you have to like Dynamesh it like, Dynamesh it at like a really high subdivision level, right? So I did almost like 900,000 so I can get that, right? So that's Dynamesh. Okay, so let's talk about ZRemesher. So ZRemesher is kind of does the first part of Dynamesh. Let's delete hidden. So let's see, delete hidden. Cool. Okay. It does that first part where it remeshes my model. So like, let's say I'm going to go ahead and move, or actually we'll use this model right here. So, it's going to correct and give me even and nice density. But ZRemesher instead is going to be drawing only quad topology, right? So it's only drawing four-sided polygons, which is nice. And then also it's going to be trying to draw the polygons to match the shape of the object, which is really nice because whenever we have a low resolution mesh, we want our mesh to have edge loops that follow the form of our object, because it makes so, I don't have a good example pulled up, but it makes it so we don't have to have as many polygons to represent our object. So if looking at this, like I guess we do kind of have it like doing this, but this isn't like an edge loop, right? Like it's just doing grid projection for you. But if I do ZRemesher, you can see there's like an edge flow that follows that shape, right? And ZRemesher has its own quirks, right? Like there's in order to get like edge loops that go exactly where you want them to, you have to do a lot of trickery. But for the most part, like a lot of times during like a sculpting workflow, when I'm going from like the very basic into like the medium level stuff, right? I will, ZRemesh it. So we have like a mesh that's like pretty decent. And then let me do that with symmetry on. And then what I'll do is I'll just work with subdivision levels, right? So we'll divide, divide, divide. And right now I'm only up to like 2 million now. But my shape's there. It looks pretty good. And usually I don't need quite as much subdivision levels and topology to get the detail that I want. So I don't have to like I don't have to have so many polygons in order to do like certain detail sculpting. Does that make sense? I know I kind of like rambled a little bit, but for the most part, what's different is Dynamesh is, so we'll go ahead and Dynamesh. Dynamesh, let's see, come on. Dynamesh just like remeshes your model, but just focuses on density and just tries to make everything even density, but it usually gives you these like really gross polygons and triangles that you can't really sculpt with. Like even if you subdivide it, it kind of gets like a little weird. And like if I let's go down subdivision level, let's go down another subdivision level, right? If I smooth or do something like that, there's like those like hits kind of show up, right? And it's not a great example, but you can start to see the limitations of the topology that it gives you. Whereas ZRemesher, what it does is it draws out the topology in a way that follows the shape and curvature of your object, which makes it when you add more resolution to your model, it makes sculpting a lot more easy and responsive. So usually you end up wanting to want to sculpt on the like secondary and tertiary levels. So doing like medium scale and fine scale details, you want a Z-remeshed or quad retopologized mesh. Like you can do it in Maya if you want to. Wherever you're taking it from, you want it like have nice clean topology to sculpt on, because all the brushes in ZBrush tend to work better with them. But Dynamesh is for welding and for really, really quick, fast ideation type stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. So,
I have time
Dynamesh
for
we use.
one. Sorry, I have time for one more question, then I have to hop to another meeting.
Oh, no, okay, Nimi, if you have questions, then go.
I just have one question for pose. Should we start with like hands on side like this, or I saw some examples where they simplified shapes, but the character wasn't.
Can you say that one more time? I lost half of the question.
Oh, I'm talking about like the pose of the
Yeah.
character. Like, should we make them like not tape, but like hands on side, or can we start with the dance pose when I simplify
I
things?
would start with a neutral pose that makes sense for your character. I would try not to have your character do things like their hands or their feet or anything like that, like cross or touch, if you can help it, at this stage, because like you might want to give them a little gap or space, even like for instance Veronica's character, like that devil character, she's standing with her heels together. I would sculpt her with her like legs kind of slightly apart, because it's going to make sculpting the legs easier, right, and the feet easier. If they're like overlapping, it gets really confusing and model management's really hard. And so then in the posing stage, you can go ahead and like push and mush things around, because that's what happens in the posing stage is like you do a little bit of simple rigging, and even in ZBrush you can like rotate and move things. But like for instance, if let's see, so I'm trying to find like a character that's like oh god, there's so much reference to look at, guys. There's so much good stuff out there, which is awesome, but it also means it's kind of overwhelming. I'm trying to find a really good example. Well, I guess we could look at your example later, and just talk about it and like give you guys ideas of how to approach doing the basic block out of your character. But let's see on the
We just like first move them into A pose and
yeah
block out them in A pose, and
yeah
on the posing stage we move them in the pose that is on the concept art or the
mhm.
one that we want to assign them to.
Yes, yeah. So you'll want to move and make enough room for the arms away from the torso. Like I said, you in this case is not a good example. You want to go ahead and spread, like have the legs kind of spread out a little bit, so their feet slightly apart. And a pose is probably pretty perfect. If your character is in like a pose where they're like going to be moving their arms forward, and like let's say they're doing something like this where they're like casting their arms forward like this, you could probably like realistically make a pose where your character is like got their arms forward, because you don't really need their arms down to the side. But I think for y'all's sake and everybody's sake, if you're starting out this, just do a typical A pose, because there's tons of references for that, and then you guys can move your character's limbs and pieces into like the pose you want. And so we'll worry about posing later. But yeah, so I would say, like I said, do an analysis of your character like I did, like this, like take your reference image, draw over it, just to kind of analyze those major forms. If you're, I think if your character, like y'all's character isn't like straight on, if it is straight on, you can kind of like do something like this where I made like a template that I could like match against. But otherwise, we just want to pull it into uh, ZBrush as a reference, and then just check once in a while back against it. So even though your character might be leaning forward, or your character might be doing like some kind of dramatic kind of pose, you still want to kind of like look at your reference and get a sense. So yeah, I think one of the problems with this one was I was showing it on my model, and so my model was so like straight up and down, so the reference is really clear, but matching against y'all's reference might be a little harder. Like I said, try to do it in oh, actually, you know what, yeah, so I still tried to do it in like, so this one was a pretty good example, right? Like I was still looking at my reference, I still broke it down like this, But you can see I started my character out in like a T pose, right? Or A pose. So, you can still do that. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I got to run to my next meeting.
Thank you so much, Caleb.
Yeah, no problem. That went on really long, but ZBrush demos usually go on really long. So I'll send you guys all the stuff later and put it. Do we have a drive for this?
No, but we can create one.
Yeah,
I
go
will
ahead.
create.
If Veronica, if you can, or Nimi, one of you guys, if you guys can make a shared Google Drive, and then I can drop stuff in there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.